Right, well, I'm here with Ian Walker, who's the Conservative candidate in the upcoming election.
Nice to meet you, Matt.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. I suppose a good place to start, I've printed off the Why I'm Standing page from your website. So if I can just read out a statement from that. You say, many people tell me they feel that they've been let down by career politicians who make promises, for example on student fees, only to find that they've been taken for a ride. But I put it to you that was it your party that actually introduced the increase in student fees?
Well, we did, but I think there's an issue here of integrity and authenticity. We did what we said we'd do on the tin.
Increasing student fees.
Yeah, and I think there's there is a justification for that. People like it or don't like it. But I think the way we've organised this so that people don't start repaying their student fees until they're on a salary, higher salary, 21,000, something like that. Whereas Labour's alternative, for example, is a graduate tax, which would start at the threshold of the tax threshold, which under Labour is just over £6,000. We've tried to organise it so you don't pay until after study. We've extended it to part-time students as well now. And also extending it now to graduate students under 30, so people can go on to postgraduate courses as well and still be supported with loans. Now, all these things have to be paid for. Labour said that would lead to a drop in students going to university. It's now at a record high of over 500,000.
Right.
And so, all these things have to be paid for. And if you look at how just it is, for example, those who don't go to university, why it is that they should be supporting and paying through their taxes for those that do, and who are going to end up with a better. So my point was really, it's about there's difficult decisions to be made, but I think it's not authentic to make signed pledges and then go back on them.
So it's your argument that your party said they were going to do it, and the Lib Dems they didn't.
And we can justify it as a coherent reason why everyone would like everything for free, but
some people would argue that, of course, during the coalition, it was actually the Conservative Party that to some extent bullied the Lib Dems into increasing tuition fees, and that it was really driven by the Conservative government. Do you agree with that? Or?
No, I think I'm coming to politics as a non-career politician. I spent most of my working life here in Sheffield as an engineer, creating jobs, hiring university graduates, hiring apprentices, giving back to the city through my work with the NHS. I'm a trustee of 4 charities. And so I've come into this really because I think there's people on the doorstep, as I mentioned on my blog, are really suspicious. We're straight talking folk, Yorkshire folk. We're inherently suspicious of career politicians. And I think when people make signed pledges was their key election point, and then completely go back on that. I think what Sheffield needs is somebody who will stand up for Sheffield, stand up for things like a lot of the loans to businesses were cut because we didn't have an MP in Sheffield at the heart of government to lobby and to go for that. I think what students are looking for is a good job at the end of their degrees. And when we see that unemployment, youth unemployment particularly, has fallen to 40% now, we're seeing huge increase in number of jobs available. The number of jobs has gone up, 1.75 million since the election. We're seeing that, and that's what really is important to folks, really. But as I go into politics, I think there are too many career politicians. I think that needs rebalancing.
Why do you say there are too many? What's your criticism of a career politician?
Well, you need some who've gone and read politics at university, gone straight into a think tank, worked for an MP, worked as an assistant and so on, who understand the mechanics of Westminster. You need some who have those experiences.
Because some would argue that the people who've gone to university and studied politics have a genuine desire to do good for the country.
Absolutely, and I'm not saying we shouldn't have any career politicians. I think we need a good number of career politicians. But my point is, you need a balance. You need those who've actually worked for the NHS, those who've actually given back to society by creating, exporting jobs, who can actually understand the implications of some of the red tape or some of the initiatives that come forward. But I also think it's very important that politicians on the whole should be local people who are born and bred in a locality, who understand their neighbourhood, who actually then can best go on to represent the voters at Westminster.
You mentioned earlier you're an engineer, and drawing back to that point about representing the electorate in your constituency, what would you say to the argument that you've been an engineer, you've been a businessman, you've made a lot of money? There are some people who have problems to do with income, to do with the lack of wealth, they can't access the job market, and that you're very disconnected from that side of the electorate. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think I'm more connected with many people. I in my businesses we employ people of all levels of skills and backgrounds. Those who are highly skilled university graduates or PhDs, those who are just starting their working life as apprentices, those who are unskilled, who are doing the jobs that we all need to be done in businesses. So I've spent my time working with folks like that, and sometimes, we see people who are subject to, the vagaries of loan sharks, things like that. As a responsible employer, we've tried to help people out where necessary. So I am rooted in the community, and as an engineer, we get involved with all sorts of activities that meeting all sorts of people. And I think it's that groundedness in if you like, the real world rather than the Westminster bubble, which is important, I think, to have that represented in Parliament. Not everybody to be engineers, not everybody to be career politicians, but a good mixture. And I don't think we've got the balance right at the moment.
Okay. We moved away from the student fees debate, but just to come back to that, we had Paul Blomfield in a few days ago, and he described the current tuition fee system as a system in crisis. He said that it is actually costing the country money because people are taking out loans to go to university, and that's actually costing the country money. He said that if he was voted in, which he is a current MP, and if he stayed in and there was a Labour government, that people wouldn't have to pay to go to university, and that he would replace that with a 2% increase in their taxes. Do you think that would encourage people to go to university? There's less of a fear of debt. If people have a Labour government, they're not going to have to pay to go to university. If they have a Conservative government, then they are.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, they are going to have to pay if it's a Labour government. They're going to pay through a graduate tax, which starts at the moment, the proposal is at the tax threshold.
Paul responded to that by saying that if you were to ask somebody what they'd prefer, he thinks they would prefer a 2% increase in their taxes rather than upwards of £30,000 of debt.
Well, the debt is only repayable when you get into really high earning job. So it's not repay. You're not burdened with that extra tax at a low income, the personal tax threshold. It's only when you get a really good job that you can afford to pay that back. And I think you're right. In one sense, it is costing the country money at the moment because we're investing in our future graduates and students, and the repayments haven't yet started because they only start to repay, when people earn those really high earning jobs, which might not happen until 5-10 years after you've graduated, when you restart to pay back that loan. And as I say, I think there's an issue of fairness that really, why should those who don't go to university, as we've had the privilege of doing, why should they pay out of their taxes if they're apprentices or regular workers? Why should they pay for us who are going to end up with better salaries?
You mentioned we went to. Presumably, did you go to university as well?
I did. Yeah, I'm an electrical engineer. That was my subject at university.
So did you pay to go to university? Or?
Not in my day. No, not in my day.
So do you think it's a little cheeky to put forward the argument of having to pay for university when you went for free yourself?
Well, I think as I say, I think it's an issue of fairness, really, and people.
Well, that seems quite unfair to me.
Well, it's unfair that people who don't go to university should pay for the privilege of those who do go to university. Yeah. And I think I've got 4 children. One is about to go to university. One is at university at the moment. One has just finished her masters. Another one graduated. We've all had to pay. They've had to pay their fair way to do that, and. Some of them will be now paying some of that back, which is fine. But it's only paying back out of how you've benefited from it.
So you're saying tuition fees equals fairer system?
I believe it does. I believe it does. And I think it's sustainable in a way that you only pay it back when you've got that really valuable job at the end, several years down the line.
Okay. So we'll move on then to the second point that's also from the Why I'm Standing page. You say at the next general election, the choice we make will be between Conservative and Labour. It will either be David Cameron or Ed Miliband in number 10. But that's not strictly true, is it? We've seen that there's so much support in Scotland because they didn't move away from the UK that we could very realistically be looking at an SNP coalition, or even, as some people say, a UKIP coalition, and that's a very realistic possibility, isn't it?
Yes, but it's not going to the SNP leader in number 10, or the UKIP leader in number 10, or the Lib Dem leader in number 10. It's either going to be David Cameron or Ed Miliband in number 10.
But
one of those two will be leading this country after May.
We could be looking at a situation where it's not so much a Conservative vision or a Labour vision, that it's very much another coalition. And if that were the case, is there a particular party that the Conservatives would favour, or a particular party that you perhaps wouldn't be willing to make a coalition with?
Well, to one extent that's above my pay grade. I'm fighting for Hallam and for the residents of Hallam, and I think it's important that we hope we'll get a majority government. But yes, nothing's off the table. Whether it's a coalition with whoever following the election, we just have to be pragmatic. And I think all credit to Nick Clegg. He stepped up to the plate at a time of national crisis in 2010 to form the coalition with the Conservatives to get us out of the mess that we're about to fall into.
Okay. The Conservative Party's fairly anti-EU, isn't it?
I wouldn't say that at all. I think the way I describe the Conservative Party is that it trusts the people, trusts them with to retain their hard-earned income, trusts them on whether to be part of the EU or not. And that's why we've undertaken we'll have a referendum on the EU.
But surely that suggests that there's an element of uncertainty as to whether or not your party is fully aligned with the EU.
Well, I think as it is at the moment, the EU is broken and it doesn't work for the residents of Europe. And so that's why it's a need for a fundamental renegotiation.
What makes you say broken?
Well, I think you're seeing a load of people in the UK and France and Germany and, of course, Greece feeling disenfranchised by the EU. There's a lack of there's a democratic deficit where people feel that decisions have been made in smoke-filled rooms. Nobody is directly elected. The president is not directly elected by the people of Europe. And you've got a system where people are thinking it's a vision for the political classes of Europe rather than for the best of interests of the people of Europe. And so that a lot of people think that. And I think that's why
the solution is clarity and reform rather than simply abandoning the EU.
Absolutely, and that is exactly the Conservative policy. We want to renegotiate the arrangements in Europe, and then once we've done the best we can to renegotiate the best arrangements, put that to the electorate to let them decide. We trust the people, whether they want to be in or out, to make the decision. Just as we did on the Scottish referendum, do they want to remain part of the UK or not? Each side made their cogent arguments, and then the people were trusted to decide. And it's going to be exactly the same with the EU. We are very happy to trust, in a democratic society, the people to decide whether we should be part of the EU or not. And each side will make their very strident arguments, I'm sure, and then we trust the people.
Okay. The Labour candidate has just been in and mentioned that currently we receive £350 million of investment from Europe, but that in Sheffield that's not being distributed properly, and there's actually been a 50% cut of that under the Conservative government. If you were elected, what would you do to rectify that?
Well, I saw that, and I think there's an issue really, again, of the incumbent politician not fighting for Sheffield. When I was chairman of Sheffield's Training Enterprise Council, I secured, along with other chairmen in South Yorkshire, over £2 billion worth of funding for South Yorkshire for investments in jobs and growth. So when there's EU money there to be had, we need to fight for it. I fought for it, and we ended up with £2 billion for Sheffield and South Yorkshire, for jobs creation, jobs growth, helping small businesses to grow and invest. And I think we've got a situation here where both Oliver and I are from Sheffield. We deeply, we've got deep roots here. Our families are from Sheffield. We fight for Sheffield. And I think that's something we're seeing is missing at the moment. We don't have somebody at the heart of government fighting for Sheffield. And whether it's Ed Miliband or David Cameron number 10, whoever they may or may not be in coalition with, we need somebody with a trusted voice at the heart of government, and that's what I offer for the residents of Hallam.
Okay, so finally, you've had quite a lot of involvement in the NHS, I've read. However, recently there's been quite a lot of criticism as to the Conservative government's handling of the NHS. There's been so much money cut from it that people have described it as a breaking point at the moment, that it has not enough money to function. How's the Conservative government allowed that?
Well, the NHS is a big organisation. Demand is growing. We have invested more in the NHS every year above inflation. So we're actually spending more on the NHS now than we were before. There are now 16,000 more doctors and nurses than there were in 2010. What we've done is the Conservatives have removed 2 bureaucratic layers in the NHS. And so there's more control now by the GPs to decide where the money that should be spent. So there's more money being spent on the NHS, more frontline staff, and it's in the hands of GPs to decide where the money is spent, rather than 2 bureaucratic layers which have been taken out. So yes, we need to continue to invest more in the NHS, absolutely true. We are investing more than inflation. But you know, we can only afford the NHS we want, and I spent more than 10 years as a non-exec director of the NHS. We can only afford the NHS we want if we have a vibrant and thriving economy. And that's which we're seeing now is happening. Like your fellow students, you want a good job at the end of your career, at the end of your degree or your postgraduate degree. A thriving economy helps students get jobs, but it also helps fund and pay for an increasing NHS, and the NHS will continue to need more money as people get older and we get better drugs and so on.
You say a thriving economy will help the NHS. How exactly will it do? Surely the NHS is funded by the government and it's totally separate from the private sector economy.
No, it is funded by the government, but only by there being a thriving economy can the government raise the taxes needed to pay for the NHS.
So the Conservatives would be pro-raising taxes and investment in the NHS, because there's fears that there's privatisation going to happen in the NHS under a Conservative government. People are fearing that.
Well, I can tell you, privatisation started under Labour. When I was a non-exec director of the NHS in South Yorkshire, Labour was keen by diktat to privatise core sections of the NHS. I don't mean ancillary services like cleaning and laundry and so on. You know, orthopaedics, things like that. They wanted what was called contestability. And when I was a director of NHS South Yorkshire, we resisted that. Not on principle, but it was a diktat. You must do so much percentage of your activities should be privatised. And we said that there's no reason for that. If it does make sense, fine. The tax take the government has is a factor of the economy. A bigger economy, without putting up tax rates, the amount of income the government receives rises up every year. And that is what we need so we can afford to spend more on the NHS every year. Not putting the tax rates up, but the income that comes from that with a bigger economy will grow.
Finally, as well, the Conservatives seem to have been quite hardline on immigration of late. Can you explain the reasoning behind that? Don't we want a diverse society in this country?
We do, and my family has benefited enormously. My father passed away a few years ago and had carers coming in 4 times a day. Many of them were from Eastern Europe, and they were wonderful people, really family-oriented people who do a fantastic job. And I celebrate and welcome the diversity in our country. I think what we do need to clamp down on, though, is people who come here without a job, who want to just get the benefits, the social security benefits, without having paid into the pot like all the rest of us. So I think if we need to be careful that we don't allow benefit tourists coming to the UK. But I welcome the diversity of people we have in the UK, and we've all benefited from that, to be frank.
So there's less of the hard line policy from the Conservatives than perhaps we're seeing from UKIP, for example.
I think that'd be a fair point.
What is the Conservative policy on immigration then? What would we see if we were going to get a Conservative government?
Well, I think there is a need to be selective outside the EU. To be selective, we're taking only good people who are going to contribute to the society and the economy. That might be skilled university graduates from other countries. as opposed to those who don't have the skills, who are not really going to contribute, who are going to be more of a burden on our society. I mean, we saw, for example, that there are a load of... I went recently to a debate on, well, first of all, to the launch of the Student Manifesto. Oliver Coppard and I were both there. We didn't see any Lib Dems there, but we were both there. And we also, I went to the Right to Stay debate, also hosted by University of Sheffield. And I think what we're seeing is, we've closed down bogus colleges, where people are coming not for a degree or for study. They're like bogus colleges to get people into the country. And there's things like that need to be clamped down on, so we're not being taken for a ride. But when people have got real skills and real things to contribute to our society, I think we've all benefited from that and will continue to do so.
Sure. Okay, so to summarise then, Conservative government, student fees still in place, but not quite so anti-EU, quite as hardline immigration as perhaps it's been criticised recently.
And I would say to your student voters, think about the authenticity and integrity of the candidates. Think about whether they really represent the best interests of Sheffield. Think about whether it's time for a fresh approach, somebody who's not a career politician, who can actually contribute something different. Because actually, at the end of the day, students want to be able to know they can go into a thriving job market, have a secure future, where they can contribute to society themselves.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for welcoming me.